Jeremy in the Wind by Nigel Kneale. Yes, it was windy when I first met him, mister. He was standing in the middle of a field, waving his arms at the big black birds who steal the little seeds and then put in the ground. My word, he could swing his arms about. So I climbed over the wall and went up, keeping low, because you're not supposed to go into men's fields, are you? When I reached him, I saw how thin he was. You could almost see the wind blowing through him. You could, really. He had a long black coat down to the ground and a brown hat and black gloves with little holes in the ends. But I liked his face. I said, "I do like your face, Jeremy." You see, I knew his name was Jeremy. It was a sort of special face. Pretty big and greeny colored, with black eyes you could see right inside, and a big smiling mouth, but I think his lips were sore. They were split and flaky looking. I had to shout because it was so windy. "Will you come for a walk with me, Jeremy?" I shouted it right up close to him, and then, you'll never guess what happened. 3 little yellow mice came out of Jeremy's mouth and ran down his coat to the ground. I like those sort of mice. When they had run right away, I took Jeremy's arm. Poor old Jeremy. He could hardly move because his foot, as it was really, because he only had one, and it was buried deep in the earth. So I got it out for him, and then he was taller than I am. I had to look right up at him, like you look up at your daddy when you're a little boy. As the wind blew, Jeremy waved his arms about and shook his head. I don't think he wanted the wind to blow that way. Then I heard him talk for the first time. He's got a sort of a dry, rattly voice, and you have to listen very hard to tell what he's saying. Jeremy said, "Let's go now, go." So I put my arms around him, and we went along down the field with his foot dragging in the soil because it was so stiff. I don't think it's very exciting just to stand in a field like he was, do you? We traveled on the road together for a while. Jeremy was leaning on me, and it was pretty steep, so at last we stopped. Jeremy rested against the hedge, while I had a drink out of a stream. The water was cold because it was so windy. A man came along on a horse cart full of cabbages, and presently he stopped and looked at us. "What have you got there?" said the man. "Jolly old pals, eh?" And he started to laugh till his eyes shut. Then there was another huge gust of wind, and Jeremy's coat billowed out, and he waggled his hands toward the man in the cart, and made a sort of noise in his throat. "He's bad," said Jeremy, and his head nodded at me. I knew that the man had upset him, so I left Jeremy against the hedge and ran at the man, and he stopped laughing. Then he swished at me with his whip. There's a mark just by where my hair begins, see? But I pulled him down into the road and knocked him over and over again until he stopped moving. The horse was frightened, I think, because he ran away, and cabbages were falling out of the cart all over the road. And when I walked away with Jeremy, I saw something dark sort of spreading round the man. But Jeremy, he just chuckled. As we went along, he talked to me, funny sort of voice he's got, until a pebble fell out of his mouth. Then he stopped, and he didn't say anything at all. So I thought perhaps the pebble helped him, and when I saw a nice shiny yellow one by the roadside, I popped it into his mouth like a sweet. At the top of the next hill, he started to talk again, and when gusts of wind came, he swung his arms. I think we must have walked a long way after that, and my feet were sore. It was about sunset, too, when we came to a village, not very far from here, I think. There was a kind of shop where they sold tea, and we went in. "We'll have food now," I said to Jeremy, but he said nothing and didn't move, because everything was still in the shop. Funny, isn't it? He's so quiet when the wind doesn't blow. In a bit, a woman came out. When she saw Jeremy, she said, "Take that thing out of here." But he didn't do anything. She looked at me again, and then back at Jeremy, and gave a little scream. "Oh!" she said. Her voice came out squeaky. "It's you! That poor Carter! You! And she ran out of the room behind the shop, and there was a noise of bells ringing. I said, "We'll get some tea, all right, Jeremy," and patted him on the back. Little pieces of straw fell out of his hand. I was hungry and cold, and I said loudly, "We want some tea," but nobody answered. After a minute, yes, it was only a minute, I heard more feet coming outside, and the door opened. I don't like policemen, do you? Well, it was one of them, and he looked at me and Jeremy and licked his lips quickly and said, "You better come with me, I think." You can't guess what happened then. Jeremy fell on the policeman. They tumbled to the ground. Then I saw Jeremy's hat and the policeman's helmet roll under a table. The policeman grabbed at Jeremy's greeny yellow head, but I knocked him and pulled Jeremy away. I think I knocked that policeman pretty hard, too. I got my arm round Jeremy and we ran out of the shop as fast as anything. I could hear the old policeman groaning behind, and the woman shouting. So now I'm here, mister. I like your house. It's nice to sit by a warm fire and see good things about you. I'd like to stay here always. Why don't you look at that window over there? That's right. Oh, you don't need to jump like that. It's only Jeremy. He's standing just where I left him. Don't you think he's got a pretty nice face? But he must be cold out there, and he hasn't got any hat either, poor old Jeremy. Now I'm going to give you a surprise. Jeremy and me are going to live here, in this house always. No, don't jump about and try to pick that thing up. I know what it is, a telephone. You mustn't run away. I'll just have to knock you hard. And then me and Jeremy will be in this house always. And sometimes we'll sit in the garden and he can talk to me on windy days. And that's the end.